First, yet another sobering assessment today on our defence preparedness or lack thereof from the man widely regarded as the father of Australia's defence policy, saying that there's now a yawning gap between the potential threats we face as a nation and our readiness to launch any defence. Professor Paul Dibbs said the key defect with this government's defence policy is the stark gap between the promises and the lack of action to change defence preparedness. Joining me now to discuss this and more, Sky News contributor Chris Uhlmann. Well, like I said, I think Dibbs is regarded as, one of the architects of Australia's defence policy. He says that the actual size of the ADF is not much larger than when he wrote our last big major review in 1986. We know a lot's changed since then, Chris, particularly with China. But Dibbs says we have failed to scale up, meaning we're not ready, he reckons, to protect the country if needed. And what do you make of his remarks?
Well, he's reminding us that we should always watch what governments do and not listen to what they say, Peter, because there is, as he says, a yawning gap between the strategic threat which the government identifies, that is, that we could be in a conflict within the next 10 years, and what we're doing about it, which is that we won't have the capacity to fight within the next 10 years, and that should disturb everyone. As he says, 60,000 people in the ADF, about half the size of the MCG. We'd run out of pilots before we ran out of planes. We'd run out of submariners before we ran out of submarines. So we have a real workforce problem within the ADF, but beyond that, we don't have the kit which we need to fight with. I will say this, however, that the defence gaps open up over long periods of time. And if you just look at the saga with the submarines, and you were there for some of this, we were supposed to get those submarines from Kevin Rudd starts it. We're going to have 12 submarines, and then Julia Gillard cuts it to 6, and then the subs are going to come from Japan under Tony Abbott, and then Malcolm Turnbull has a bromance with Emmanuel Macron, and they're going to come from France, and then they're going to be nuclear submarines, which are coming apparently from the United States. Look, Peter, I am seriously concerned that I won't ever see one of those submarines tied up in Sydney Harbour in my lifetime. I think we should all be concerned about that.
One of the reasons Abbott liked the Japanese sub, because we were looking for an off-the-shelf build. He was hostile to the defence bureaucracy, wanting to sort of, you build something in Australia, more pork barrelling for South Australia in particular. He wanted them in the water as soon as possible. We saw that report yesterday, Chris, that we had about 4 or 5 years under the Rudd-Gillard regime. We didn't have a sub to put to sea.
Yes, and I think you've really put your finger on it there. What's happened with defence policy too often is it's become industry policy, and it's sprayed out around Australia. Yeah. So if you really are serious, we do need to start getting some things just off the shelf. It would be great if we could make them here in Australia, but something as sophisticated as a submarine, which is about as sophisticated as a rocket you would fire to the moon, well, that's not something we have the skill set for here. If we want it quickly, it has to be built overseas, and maybe all of them have to be built overseas. And that's unfortunate, but if we're going to defend the nation, we need to do that. Before that, Peter, I think we need to essentially have area denial in and around the coastland of Australia. That we need to do what China did when they were sailing aircraft carriers through the Taiwan Strait. When the Americans did that, the Chinese just put in area denial weapons. They turned the mainland of China into a giant base, and then they spread out and they turned islands in the South China Sea into a giant unsinkable aircraft carrier.
That requires a bit of will in Canberra. I've not yet seen that. We hear them talking tough about immigration. Key to that, obviously, is reducing the numbers of Chinese students and, other students, but it is a lot of Chinese kids coming to study in Australia. I don't reckon they're going to take China on. We've got Premier Lee arriving here in the middle of June. Give me your odds. Do you reckon Albanese is going to get in the room behind closed doors and say, hey, I know you're cranky about our decision on Chinese students, but you're going to have to wear it? I don't think so.
Well, he should deal with the Chinese the way the Chinese would deal with us, and that is we'll decide who comes to Australia in the manner in which they come. You would not be telling the Chinese which students can go to China. You shouldn't be telling an Australian government what to do, but this is all par for the course when it comes to the relationship with China. Essentially, the way that it works is that China tells us what it would like, and we say, yes, thank you very much, and if we don't, then China gets annoyed. I'd like to see the Vice-Chancellors taken on, Peter. Isn't the real issue in all of this that the universities have essentially built their business model around selling not degrees as much as permanent residency and citizenship to Australia? That's the pathway.
100% Chris Uhlmann. You're spot on.
Yeah, they have built their business on it, Peter. So that's the issue, and the Vice-Chancellors should think, If the students have been cut off in the past, they can be cut off again in the future. It would be in their interest to diversify, but they really don't want to.
I have to say, you look at the world rankings, I think our best university is just inside the top 50. And so when we're competing with the UK and particularly the United States, who do not offer the residency route we do, the trump card is you can come here to Australia, you can bring your dependents, which they do, you can't do that in other countries. You can buy property in Australia for the length of the time you're here, and you just keep pushing out that visa, and eventually you get to stay. That's what the universities are selling, and all the poor old Australians are mugs because we allow them to do it. We've got to stop that.